Lehman Brothers hid $50 billion of debt with one accounting trick, and almost nobody outside the firm noticed until it was too late. The trick had a bland, almost boring name: Repo 105. It sounds like a filing cabinet code, not the thing that helped sink the largest bankruptcy in United States history, but that is exactly what it was. To understand why Repo 105 worked, you first need to understand what a normal repo transaction actually is. Repo is short for repurchase agreement. In its ordinary form, a bank hands over a bundle of assets, bonds, mortgage securities, whatever it happens to be holding, to another firm in exchange for cash. The bank agrees to buy those same assets back a few days later at a slightly higher price. That small price difference is effectively interest. Everyone in finance treats this as what it plainly is: a short-term loan with the assets as collateral. The bank still owns the assets. It still carries the debt on its books. Nothing about its actual financial position has changed. It has just borrowed cash for a few days and pledged something as security. Lehman's version of this transaction was dressed up just enough to be classified differently. Under an obscure accounting rule, if a firm transferred slightly more collateral value than the cash it received, roughly 105%, hence the name, the transaction could be booked not as a loan, but as an outright sale. On paper, Lehman wasn't borrowing against those assets anymore. It was selling them. And when you sell an asset, the debt tied to it disappears from your balance sheet. Not because the debt is gone, because the accounting fiction says the asset itself, and the risk that came with it, now belongs to someone else. Why 105% specifically? Because accounting standards at the time drew a hard line based on how much collateral got pledged relative to the cash received. Pledged collateral worth roughly the same as the cash, and the transaction reads as a financing arrangement, a loan, full stop. But push the collateral value up over that threshold, hand over more in assets than you're getting back in cash, and the same transaction could be classified as a genuine transfer of ownership, a sale. It's a strange feature of the rule. Giving away slightly more, not less, was what flipped the label from loan to sale. Lehman's finance team didn't discover some hidden loophole nobody else knew existed. They found a boundary condition in a technical standard and built a repeatable, calendar-driven process around living just on the far side of it, every single quarter, for years. The timing is where the real trick lived. Lehman didn't do this randomly throughout the year. It did it right before each quarter ended, right before the moment when investors, credit rating agencies, and regulators would look at the balance sheet and judge how leveraged the firm actually was. In the days just before the reporting cutoff, Lehman would push out these Repo 105 transactions and watch close to $50 billion of debt vanish from the public picture. Then, once the quarter closed and the number had already been reported and digested by the market, Lehman would quietly reverse the whole thing. It would buy back the same assets, put the debt back on, and go back to operating exactly as it had before, days later, like nothing had happened. Because, from the business's actual risk exposure, nothing had. This is the part that should stop you. The technical mechanics of Repo 105 were legal. Lehman found a real accounting provision and used it in a way that a lawyer could defend on paper. But legality on a technicality is not the same as legitimacy in substance. The only function this maneuver served was cosmetic. It didn't reduce risk. It didn't change what Lehman owed or owned in any way that mattered to the firm's actual solvency. It only changed what investors were shown at the one moment investors were looking. And we know this wasn't spin from outside critics after the fact, because Lehman's own people said so internally, in writing. Executives referred to the practice as cosmetic in their own messages. That word matters. It means the people running the trade knew exactly what it was for, not risk management, appearance management. What makes this more unsettling than a rogue trader scandal is who was involved. This wasn't one desperate trader hiding a bad position from his bosses. This was a repeated, institutionalized practice. Senior finance staff signed off on it. Not once, as an emergency measure in a single bad quarter, but again and again, quarter after quarter, as a standing part of how Lehman managed its public image. That kind of repetition tells you something about culture. A single instance of manipulation can be an aberration. A quarterly ritual is a system. People inside Lehman's finance function normalize this. They built it into the calendar. Report is coming up, so do the trade. Report is done, so reverse it. It became routine enough that it stopped registering, internally, as the kind of red flag it would have been to an outside observer seeing it for the first time. Think about how that normalization actually happens inside an organization, because it rarely happens all at once. Nobody sits down in year one and says, "We are going to defraud our investors on a recurring basis." It starts smaller. A number is a little worse than leadership wants to report. Someone finds a legal, technical maneuver that improves the optics without changing the underlying reality. It works. Nobody outside notices. Next quarter, the same pressure exists, so the same tool gets used again. Each individual use feels defensible in isolation, because each individual use is, technically, within the rules. But the aggregate effect, over years, is a balance sheet that investors, rating agencies, and regulators were reading as far healthier than it was. The rot isn't in any single decision. It's in the fact that nobody with the authority to stop the pattern ever asked why the same number kept improving right before the same date, every single time. This is worth sitting with for a second, because it's a genuinely useful insight beyond the Lehman story itself. Repeated, sanctioned behavior stops feeling like a decision at all. The first time someone runs a Repo 105 trade, it's a choice, made consciously, probably with some internal debate about whether it's really okay. By the 10th time, by the 40th time, it's just what you do before quarter end. It has a name, a process, a calendar slot. The people executing it are no longer weighing right and wrong each cycle. They're following a procedure. That shift from decision to procedure is exactly how organizations end up doing things collectively that almost none of the individuals involved would have chosen to do if you'd asked them cold, on day one, in plain language, with no institutional momentum behind it. Then came 2008. Credit markets, which had been quietly wobbling for over a year on the back of subprime mortgage exposure, seized up entirely. Firms that relied on being able to borrow cheaply and continuously to fund their operations suddenly found that nobody wanted to lend to them at any price, because nobody trusted anyone else's balance sheet anymore. This is the moment where Repo 105 stopped being a clever accounting trick and became a catastrophic liability. All that leverage Lehman had been hiding at each quarter end didn't go away just because the market turned. It was still there, real and immovable, the entire time. The $50 billion in disguised debt had never actually left Lehman's risk exposure. It had only left the report. And in a crisis, the gap between what a balance sheet says and what a balance sheet actually is becomes the single most important fact in the world, because that gap is exactly what determines whether counterparties keep extending you credit or pull it all at once. They pulled it all at once. Lehman Brothers collapsed within days in September of 2008. It remains the largest bankruptcy filing in United States history. And it didn't fail quietly in a corner of the financial system. Lehman's collapse is widely credited with helping trigger the broader global financial crisis, the one that wiped out retirement savings, froze credit for ordinary businesses, and led to a recession felt across the entire world economy. A later bankruptcy investigation dug through Lehman's internal records and reached an unambiguous conclusion. Repo 105 had no genuine business purpose beyond making the firm's leverage look lower than it actually was. Not a hedging strategy. Not a liquidity tool. A pure appearance play, run at scale for years by people who understood exactly what they were doing. What strikes me most, looking back at it now, is how mundane the actual mechanism was. There was no exotic derivative, no secret offshore vehicle, no forged signature anywhere in the chain, just a classification rule, used on purpose, on a schedule, to make a true number disappear from view for exactly as long as it needed to. Here is where this stops being a story about Wall Street and starts being a story about management, because the actual lesson isn't really about the fraud. Fraud gets headlines. The pattern behind the fraud is what should change how you operate. A number that improves sharply right before a deadline and then reverts right back to where it was right after that deadline passes is not a coincidence worth shrugging off. It is a signal. And the uncomfortable truth is that most boards, most executives, most managers reviewing a report never think to ask the one question that would have caught Repo 105 years before it mattered. What did this number look like a week before the cutoff? And what does it look like a week after? That single question is almost never asked in almost any organization about almost any metric. We are trained to review the number as it's handed to us, at the moment it's handed to us, and move on. We rarely pull the thread on timing. But timing is exactly where a managed number reveals itself, because reality doesn't usually snap into a different shape for one specific reporting date and then snap back. Genuine improvement tends to hold. Manufactured improvement tends to revert because the underlying conditions never actually changed, only the presentation did. You see smaller, more mundane versions of this pattern constantly in ordinary workplaces that have nothing to do with investment banking. Picture a sales team heading into the final week of the quarter. The pipeline number that gets reported to leadership looks strong. Deals are marked as closing. Forecasts look healthy. The dashboard is green. Then the new quarter starts, and a chunk of those deals quietly slip, get renegotiated, or evaporate entirely. Nobody necessarily lied, but deals got pulled forward in classification. Discounts got extended to close things early, and soft commitments got counted as firm ones, all timed to land exactly before the number got reported upward. The pipeline didn't actually improve. The reporting window did. I've seen versions of this in almost every sales organization that reports quarterly, and the tell is always the same. Ask a rep to explain a deal's status in plain language without touching the CRM stage field, and the story often sounds far less certain than the dashboard color suggests. Or picture a manufacturing floor or a warehouse tracking safety incidents ahead of a scheduled external audit. Everyone on that floor knows roughly when the auditors are coming because these visits are scheduled weeks in advance. In the run-up, the reported incident count starts to dip. Supervisors get a little more careful about what gets logged as a real incident versus what gets waved off as a near miss that doesn't count, what gets written up in the official log at all versus handled quietly and off the books. None of this necessarily involves anyone hiding an actual injury. It's softer than that, 100 small classification calls, each one shading slightly toward the version that looks better on paper. The audit happens, the number looks great, the auditors sign off, everyone moves on with their week. Then, a month later, once the auditors are gone and the spotlight has moved somewhere else entirely, the reported rate quietly climbs back to where it always sat before. The actual physical safety of that floor never changed by much in either direction, the whole time. What changed was the willingness to record reality honestly during the specific 2 weeks someone with a clipboard and outside authority was watching. Or picture a software team ahead of a quarterly performance review. The open bug count, the one metric leadership glances at on a dashboard to judge code quality without digging any deeper, drops sharply the week before the review. Tickets get closed in a hurry, reclassified as won't fix even when they arguably should have been fixed, or quietly merged into other tickets, so they stop counting as separate line items. The review happens, the trend line on the dashboard looks like real, sustained progress, and the team gets its praise. Maybe even a bonus tied to that exact metric. Then, within a few weeks, once nobody senior is looking at that particular chart anymore, the bug count creeps right back up to its old baseline. The underlying software didn't actually get more stable during that 1 week. Only the ticket queue got tidied, briefly, cosmetically, for an audience that was only ever going to look once. None of these 3 scenarios involve criminal fraud on the scale of Lehman Brothers. Nobody is going to prison over a sales pipeline or a bug tracker, but they are the exact same shape of behavior at a much smaller scale, and they carry the exact same underlying warning, which is this: whenever people know precisely when they're being measured, and whenever there is any flexibility at all in how a number gets classified or reported, some of that flexibility will get used to make the measured moment look better than the surrounding reality. This isn't necessarily a story about bad people. It's a story about incentives interacting with unmonitored discretion, which is a management design problem, not a morality problem. And design problems get fixed with design, not with lectures about honesty. And here's the part I think most managers get backwards. The fix isn't to demand more honesty from your team. Everybody already believes they're being honest, technically, within the rules they've been given. The same way Lehman's finance staff could tell themselves the Repo 105 trades were legal. The fix is to change what gets measured, so that the reporting window itself stops being a predictable, gameable event. Measure the pipeline on a rolling basis, not just at quarter end. Sample safety incidents on random weeks, not only the weeks everyone knows are being watched. Track the bug count as a trailing average instead of a single snapshot taken right before the meeting. You don't need to catch anyone lying. You need to remove the specific calendar window where lying pays off. So don't just review the number you're handed at face value. At the moment it's handed to you, ask what it looked like a week earlier. Ask what it looks like a week or two after the reporting date has passed, and nobody is specifically watching anymore. If the answer stays roughly consistent across that window, you're probably looking at something real. If the number spikes right at the cutoff and reverts right afterward, on a pattern that repeats every single reporting cycle, you are not looking at good management. You are looking at a managed number, dressed up for the one moment someone with authority was going to glance at it. Treat a suspiciously smooth, suspiciously well-timed metric as a request for closer scrutiny, not as proof that everything is fine. Lehman's finance staff weren't stopped by curious outsiders asking hard questions. They were stopped by a market crisis that made the hidden leverage impossible to hide any longer, and by then it was already too late for the firm to survive it. You don't want to be the manager or the board member who only finds out what a metric was covering up after the crisis has already arrived to reveal it for you. If you take one habit from the collapse of the largest bankruptcy in American history, make it this one. Check the week before and check the week after, on every number that matters, every single reporting cycle. It costs you almost nothing. What it can save you is everything.